Let us come online. Good morning, Belvedere First. What I realize is sometimes because I'm not completely set up when things start that it takes a moment for things to get going. So I hope that today, see, and this is an odd thing, it does not come up live on my personal page for whatever reason. That's okay. We'll do it on the B1 page, and we'll do it on the YouTube page. I'm trying to get my chat window to come up. It's having issues here. So if you're saying hi, it will take me a minute to see it. I should have gone ahead and refreshed that before I started. I didn't, because, it's where I'm at. But good morning. Glad to have you guys on board. I have kind of an exciting thing to talk about this morning. Kind of an exciting thing. I know, don't oversell it, right, David? No. I had an interesting conversation that started with my middle child, Gareth. We talked about proofs of God's existence. Gareth is a very bright child. I guess he's not really a child since he's in 21 now, or however old. I don't know that I'm ready for him to be 21, honestly, between me and you. But we had an interesting discussion about miracles, their place, why they exist, if in fact they do happen. From his point of view, like I said, he's a little more on the skeptical side. But I will tell you this, that I have been always somewhat skeptical, and especially when someone tells me about things, I do always want to kind of break it down first and verify that it's something that I, not verify, because it's never like I'm going to be like, okay, God, if you don't prove this right, then I'm going to assume you're lying. It's not that at all. In fact, I hate when people do that. I have seen people do that when it comes to things of faith. But more a matter of, and guys, let me know if you're here, if you can see me, if all those things are on. My chat windows are now live. So, you should be able to see me, and I should be able to hear you. I want to tell this to... all right, boom. I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that to see if that posts to my page and does the thing I'm asking it to do. We got a 50-50 shot. Anyway, good morning, Belvedere First. Let's get back to this. So we had a conversation about miracles, about the supernatural in general. When I was talking to him about the supernatural, he has more of a disinclination to believe in the supernatural than I do. Now, oddly enough, this comes in a time when I'm preaching a sermon series on the life of David. And here's what struck me about the life of David, is if you're in the book of Judges, there are tons of miracles. If you're in the book of Kings, there are tons of miracles, especially with Elijah and Elisha. In the book of Judges, you have everything from Samson to Gideon to all of these different times when miracles are happening. But here in the book of Samuel that I've been preaching about for the last couple weeks, there's all of a sudden an absence of miracles. When you look at the life of David, you don't see a lot of miracles. There are a couple times where you could kind of come close and say, was David and Goliath, was that a miracle? Hey, nice. Thanks, Patrick, that we are coming in live and clear in Houston, Texas. Sammy Powell, good to see you this morning. Stephanie Leitner, good to see you this morning. You didn't say hi, but I'm going to assume you would say hi if you had time to type. Maybe you're up there at the rescue mission with Charmel. I know what you guys are thinking. You're thinking, isn't it a little warm out today for a fireplace? Well, I thought I would go ahead and get it lit up and, going and warm myself up to this chalkboard fireplace. But I had a conversation last night with somebody who just saw a miracle in their life, something amazing. And not just a miracle, and I won't talk about it because it was kind of very personal to that person, but it was in her own words, their own words, undeserved, right? And that's the thing about it, that what the undeservedness of it is what makes it a miracle. Like if it was something that you kind of felt like, well, God owed me, or the world owed me, or life owed me, that doesn't seem like a miracle. It's when it seems like this is not something that you should have gotten, that it seems like God broke his own rules in order to give you this miracle, that it's so amazing. And so when I was talking to the Lord this morning, because I woke up this morning, hey, good morning, Linda Andrews, praying for you guys, praying for your family. The Lord works everything out there. But this idea of God breaking his own rules. So here's this thing. And we're gonna go to 1 Samuel or 1 Kings chapter 17 here in a second. I'm at the place I get my hair cut, and the lady is talking about how she wants to do some free haircuts, and I'm like, well, listen, she wants to give us some free haircuts to pass out at our food pantry. And I was like, well, we do, for Christmas and Thanksgiving, each of those, we do at least 500 families. So I don't think you want to give out 500 haircuts. And she's like, yeah, I think you're right. But what I said, what we could do, though, is if you gave me a certain number, then I would give those to my staff, the people that are out there, and I would let them pass them out as they kind of felt the need. So I would give them to them and say, okay, like, listen, when you're going through cars and you're looking and you just see somebody, if the Lord just puts it on your heart and you're like, this is the person that needs it, you take that thing out of your pocket, you say, here, this place is going to give you a free haircut. I'm going to sneeze. One more. I apologize for having biological functions that are normal to all human beings. Being an apologetic person, I still feel the need for some reason to say, I'm sorry. But anyway, so I said, what we'll do is, I feel like I'm going to sneeze again. It's, you know what? It's because we're having like a 65, 70 degree day in Belvedere in the middle of December. And that is so against nature that even my body understands that. I blame Tara Wolf for coming up here with all her warm weather and cheerfulness. You keep that down in Florida. That is not how we live here. This is not the place we have moved to. We enjoy our cold weather suffering so that we can make fun of people who have moved to warmer climates. That's part of the deal with working here. But as it happens, today it actually is going to be very warm, and I think that is affecting my allergies. Speaking of miracles. But the reason I said that about the food pantry, about handing out certain things, is what I found about the food pantry from the very moment we started. When we first started it, we actually did it inside. Because of COVID, we've gone to what you call a no-touch pantry, no-contact pantry, where they pull up and we put the food in their vehicle and try to limit our contact with them as much as possible because you don't want physical contact, when you can spread disease and things like that. But what was interesting was when we had it inside, we all knew the rules. And the rules are they pick one of this item or one of that item, one of this item, one of that item. They get this many of this many of that, right? So there was kind of a set number. They got to choose what they wanted, but we had people who would walk them through. And what I noticed that people love to do in that pantry is they loved to cheat. Meaning, if you had a person and they had their kid with them and you came to the place where there were some candy bars or granola bars or something sweet, you'd slip them a couple of extra. If you found somebody who kind of lived on their own and they needed a certain thing and they were really happy to get it, you'd slip them an extra. So what I found was that every week we broke the rules for somebody, right? And each person liked to break the rules. It was their moment to really bless somebody, right? Because one, the pantry itself was a blessing, but here was a chance to personalize that blessing, and somebody comes through, and this is what they, again, deserve, and yet instead, we give them a little extra of that. And just the joy on the workers' faces to be able to do that for somebody was amazing. Now, here's the funny thing, as the manager, as the pastor, you always say, well, these are the rules, and this is what you do. But when they break the rules, you kind of smile and you're kind of happy. Now, I'm not giving you guys permission to do that, because if we broke the rules for every single person every single time, we would run out of resources. Now, obviously, it's not the same with God, who has unlimited resources. But I will say this, when it comes to miracles and the Lord, that the uniqueness of them points to the fact that it's an act of love and not an act of obligation. If the things that happen in miracles happened all of the time, they would not be miracles, they would not be an exception, they would be the rule, they would be the law of nature. Right? That God sets in this universe certain laws, certain rules, certain things of nature that will happen like clockwork. If I, pick up this bottle cap and let go, gravity is going to pull it to the ground. No intervention required. That is how things work. If I stop eating, I will lose weight, but if I continue to stop eating, I will eventually die, right? That is a law of nature, requires no intervention. They are things that God has set in motion, and that always happens. So those are not miracles. Hey, good morning, Sam. Yeah, give it a minute, right? And thank you for saying hi over there on the YouTube channel. Yes, that is an amazing temperature for this time of year here in Belvedere. The world is going a little cattywampus now in many ways. But the uniqueness of miracles points to the fact that they are unique. So when I was talking to Gareth, I was talking about we were actually talking about how when you prove the Bible, not just the Bible, but when you go to prove God, when you go to explain to someone, this is how we know God exists, that I always say that the universal experience of all human beings since time has been recorded, right? Since time immemorial, even before time was recorded, we know that the first structures humans make are temples. The first thing they build outside of their own shelter is a place to worship. So that all humans through all history have all understood that there is someone else, not something else, someone else, that there is a personhood of supernatural origins, right? That we've all understood that there was a God. And so if you want to be an atheist, like a pure materialistic, the earth and the material realm are all that exist atheist, you are literally going against the experience of every human ever, which is why I feel like atheism itself is both untenable and honestly dishonest. Because people who claim to be atheist are usually very dishonest about their own experiences with the divine and with the supernatural. And what I would also say is that when it comes to miracles, that this is, and I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to start here and we're going to come back to here, right? I'm starting here, 10 minutes in. I'm going to start with this, that every single person you have ever met or come into contact with either has or will experience at some point in their life something that they can only explain as a supernatural event, that things would normally progress along this route and they cried out to God, or God intervened, or in some way the presence of God was made known, and then that outcome changes according to that event. That you have an experience that this is how things happen, then you have an intervention that God allows you to know that things are going to be different somehow, and then according to that, things change. Now, man, we have a lot of ways to unpack that. There are a lot of problems people have with that, but let's start with this. I thought I would start in 1 Kings, because like I said, I'm in the book of David when I'm preaching, right, on Sundays, and in the book of Samuel, where it tells the story of David, there are not any or many miracles. Whether David and Goliath was a miracle, whether, what's the other one? The other one would be the threshing floor, where the angel stands at the threshing floor, where God says a thing, where David commits the sin of numbering the people that God had told him not to do, and so a plague sweeps the land, and then David actually sees the angel standing at the threshing floor. That's one of the only times that you see David interacting in what would be considered a miraculous event. Chris Kabatsky is texting me in the middle of me being live because he doesn't have Facebook. So everybody who's watching, text Chris Kabatsky if you know him and say, hey, stop it. Pastor David is live trying to do his thing. Anyway, just to mess with Chris. Anyway, in 1 Samuel 17, this is one of my favorite miracles in the whole Bible because there's two parts. So there's two different miracles that happen to the same person, and they're connected to each other. The first one is this. So in 1 Kings chapter 17, it says, "Then the word of the Lord came to him, get up and go to Zarephath that belongs to Sidon and stay there. Look, I have commanded a woman who is a widow to provide for you there." So what has happened is Elijah has announced famine. It's a judgment on Israel because Israel has strayed from God, because they are abandoning the worship of Yahweh, because they are worshiping other idols. There is going to be a famine and a drought in the land. In the midst of that, God tells Elijah that I have already made a provision for you. There is a widow in the region of Sidon. So Elijah goes up and went to Zarephath, and when he arrived at the city gate, there was a widow gathering wood. Elijah called to her and said, "Please bring me a little water in a cup and let me drink." And she went to get it, and he called to her and said, "Please bring me a piece of bread in your hand." So these would be normal things that you would be allowed to ask somebody in the hospitality of the Middle East at that time, in the Levant, where you would meet somebody. Because understand, they didn't have hotel chains, right? They didn't have inns and taverns at every junction and things like that. That a lot of the time when you were a traveler, a stranger, you would ask people for hospitality. Hospitality is huge in the Old Testament, and violating the rules of hospitality was just considered abhorrent, right? And so this is a very reasonable request that any person could make of any other person. This wasn't like a supernatural. This wasn't like putting a big burden on him. He's just like, bring me some bread and bring me some water. But the woman responds, but she said, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have anything baked, only a handful of flour in the jar and a bit of oil in the jug. Just now I am gathering a couple of sticks in order to prepare it for myself and my son so that we can eat it and die. It's the resignation of her that really gets me in this chapter, right? The fact that she understands, I have just this much, I'm going to make just this much, and after that happens, I am fully expecting that myself and my son are going to starve to death. There is something heartbreaking about a woman and her child that are left so destitute that she understands that all she has left is all she has left, and when that is gone, she's just going to lay down and let life slip away. But of course, God has told Elijah that he's going to be provided for and that this is the woman that's going to do it. So Elijah has a great deal of faith that what is going to happen next is going to happen according to the will of God. The woman, however, is not even an Israelite. She is a Sidonite. I guess that's how you would say it. Sidonite? Sidonite? Samsonite? I don't know. She might be luggage. Who knows? No, but she knows... but she does not have faith in Yahweh. She is not a believer in the same God that Elijah is a believer in. She is probably, can you believe it, a Baal worshiper, right? That she probably worships either an Asherah or a Baal, probably Baal more than Asherah, just because she's a woman. And I believe that Asherah really kind of appealed to the men for very specific reasons. But she's been sent there as an unbeliever, as a Gentile, as a person outside of the church in our modern parlay, to provide for the man of God. And so he says in verse 13, then Elijah said to her, don't be afraid, go and do as you have said, but first make me a small loaf from it and bring it out to me. Afterward, you may make some for yourself and your son. Now that is a lot of nerve. Make me what you have left that you have said is the only provision and all that you have left for you and your son. Give that to me first, and then God's going to provide the rest. That is... Gosh, that as a pastor, that would be hard for me to tell someone, listen, take everything you have in your pocket for the offering. That is all you have left to give to anybody. Take that and give it to the Lord, and the Lord is going to provide it to you. I will tell you that if I say that, that is because I know for sure the Lord has given me a specific revelation of that moment that is what's going to happen. I can tell you this. There's a certain sort of miracle that always happens with givers. People who give are always provided for. Big givers, people who give out of the abundance of their heart, joyfully, cheerfully, because that's what they are. People that are those kind of givers are absolutely always provided for. Sammy, I'm going to give you some props and say that Sammy is a giver. She is the kind of person that always gives. If she has it in her pocket, she's going to hand it to you. That's the kind of person she is, and that's an awesome person. And I know that Sammy went through some times where, things seemed a little shaky, and yet every moment the Lord provides for her. Why? Because that's not even a miracle. That part is not a miracle. That those who give, that is a spiritual law that God has put into place that happens without his own direct intervention. That those who give, it is given unto them, right? Pressed down, shaken together, overmeasured, right? That God just has this thing built into the universe that the people who are givers, he always makes sure they are taken care of one way or the other. That's the law, the same law that goes into tithing and any sort of giving. When you give as unto the Lord, he always provides back, and he almost always provides back more than what you give, right? All right, so Elijah said to her, don't be afraid, go and do as you've said, but first make me a small loaf from it and bring it out to me. Afterward, you may make some for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. And he's specifying that this is not your God, this is the God I serve. I understand that you serve other gods, that you are in a different place, but what I'm telling you is this is going to be, are you ready for it, a sign to an unbeliever, right? Not an unbeliever out of rebellion, not somebody who has been presented the message and refused it, but somebody who does not know at this point that there is such a thing as a God of Israel who would love someone who lives in a different country. Because understand, that from her understanding in that part of the country, she would believe her Baal of Sidon would be specific to her region. There was a geography to the gods that they would inhabit this region or that region, which, by the way, is more characteristic of a pagan god or a demon than it is of Yahweh. That Yahweh, remember there was a time when they were fighting Israel and they said, oh, well, their God is a God of the valley, a God of the hills, so let's fight him in the valley. And they go down the valley and they get defeated again because the God of the mountain is still God in the valleys. That Yahweh is not a geographical bound God, but he is a God of all creation over all things. But in her understanding, it's just her God over her area that's providing for her. And what he's saying is, my God, who is the God of Israel, but he is also Lord of all, Lord Almighty, is going to provide for you. The flour jar will not become empty, and the oil jug will not run dry until the day the Lord, and again that's capitalized, the day Yahweh sends rain on the surface of the land. So she, who has more faith than Elijah, because Elijah is asking her to do a miracle out of experience of a God who has always done miracles. He's been fed by ravens. He's had things happen where God has provided for him. So Elijah absolutely knows this is the nature and characteristic of God to do these sorts of things, but she is doing it out of a faith that this is a man of God speaking on behalf of God, and that God, Yahweh, is going to provide for this need. And so she does it. Then the woman Elijah and her household ate for many days. The flour jar did not become empty, and the oil jug did not run dry, according to the word the Lord he had spoken through Elijah. So you have this amazing thing where this woman is in absolute desperation. She is prepared for the end, and the man of God shows up and says, God is going to do a miracle that's going to require a huge step of faith on your part. She does the step of faith. She takes the leap. She jumps out, and then God provides. Right? Till the day the rain comes back, she's eating bread and water, right? And which is way more than a lot of people had at that point. In fact, I love what Jesus says when he's coming out down on the Pharisees, because the Pharisees were very much about God loves Israel and not the Gentiles. I mean, the Pharisees, one of their big things was like when Jesus has the parable of the Samaritan, it's because the Jews only had taken the law to say that when the Bible says love your neighbor as yourself, that only other Israelites were their neighbor. And they were using it as an excuse not to love Romans, not to love Greeks, not to love Gentiles, not to love Samaritans, most of all. They were misusing Scripture. And Jesus would use things like this, where he would say, you know what? There were a lot of widows in Israel who were going hungry during this famine, and yet God sent Elijah outside of Israel to these Gentiles because God loves them. Two principles of miracles here. One, this miracle was performed out of desperation in a time of need. There was a very specific need that needed to be met, and there was no natural way for that to be met. And so God comes into someone who is not rebellious, but someone who is seeking after the Lord, at least on some level. Elsewise, how would she take this giant step of faith, right? And because of that desperation, God performed something absolutely miraculous. I've seen where two people had almost the exact same calamity come on their life. It was a physical injury. One of them worked for the school system, and one of them had no insurance. And the one that worked for the school system, everything was taken care of. Every bill, every medical, down the line was taken care of. Boom, 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 everything paid. And the other person that did not have that had, the injuries were very parallel. But the thing was, the one that had nothing, God miraculously healed. And the one that had all of the insurance and all of those other things, they were also healed, but they were healed through the medical profession. They were healed through the hands of doctors and medicines and things like that. God was at work in both of those things because, listen, the medical profession can do all they can do, and sometimes it still doesn't come out right? So there's still the hand of God guiding her through that. But this one was given a miracle. Does God love one any different? Is there, any sort of, no, it's just that one, absolutely, God was the only answer. And this is why, by the way, I think a lot of times in our culture, in our modern Western culture, we miss out on a lot of miracles because we are so wealthy and we are so well fed and we are so dependent upon our own resources to see us through things, that there are times when God is your only answer, your only recourse, the only one who can, and in those moments he absolutely every time comes through and does. Right? Now listen, sometimes we're healed here and sometimes we're healed there, but I've seen a lot of people get healed on this side. They get healed because their only answer, their only opportunity, the only one coming for them was God. So one, it was out of desperation. Two, what was the second one? It was assigned to a seeker, not an unbeliever. I have 5 different times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 5 different instances in which miracles happen. The first 2 are demonstrated here, right? The provision of desperation, right? That because she absolutely needed it, because there was desperation, God came through in a big way. I think a lot of times, especially in areas that are more impoverished, we see more miracles because they absolutely have no other recourse than to cry out to God. And there is something about crying out to God, the cry of his children, that touches the heart of God and causes him to respond. Right? The other one is that it's a sign to seekers, not unbelievers, like in Matthew 16, that Jesus is like, this wicked generation seeks a sign. Like, you guys always want me to do something. All of the Jews and Pharisees would be like, okay, if you're the Son of God, perform a miracle. Even though they knew he performed the miracle of the fish, he knew they performed the miracle of Lazarus. They'd see miracle after miracle, but they were not going to believe, because no matter what you threw in front of them, the miracle wasn't going to change their mind, because the problem was not that they hadn't seen a miracle. The problem was their hearts were hard. They were rebellious. They did not want to believe. And when you don't want to believe, you can take anything and make it not miraculous. You can take the most supernatural thing and make it an ordinary thing, because you'll find a reason in your mind to not believe that God has done that thing. Miracles are not to convince unbelievers. People who don't want to believe will continue to not want to believe, right? Because every time I see all of this stuff in society where it seems like they are running headlong away from God, I'm like, man, God, just step in front of them and boom, and show them. But here's the thing, no matter what he does, they're going to find a way to continue in their rebellion. And here's the thing, just one of those principles in Scripture that you got to be careful of is that you are responsible for the level of revelation that you were given, meaning the more God has told you, the more you know, the more responsible you are before him for that. And then if God does a miracle in the life of an unbeliever and they choose not to believe it, they're under a worse judgment than they were before he did the miracle. That same miracle that would free you or I would cause them to go more into bondage, because they're going to come under judgment now because they have seen this miracle and denied it and moved past it anyway. And then on that last day when they stand before God, they're going to have to explain that, and their judgment is going to be worse than had that never happened. I think about Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh saw more miracles than almost anybody in the Old Testament, right? And yet for each one, his heart was hardened. He disbelieved. He was convinced that it was anything other than his own actions and his own rebellion, and so he made everything fit into his narrative, and he would not let God's people go until God passed the ultimate judgment of the firstborn on all the land. So, 1, it's a provision of desperation. 2, it's a sign to seekers. Now, here's the thing about the miracle that we just read, is it's not the end of the story. It's not the end of the story of the widow of Zarephath. In fact, in 17, it continues. After this, so some time had passed, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. His illness got worse until he stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "Man of God, what do you have against me? Have you come to call attention to my iniquity so that my son is put to death?" In the belief system that she was a part of, because understand she had the provision, but she still was holding on to a lot of her pagan beliefs. One of those pagan beliefs would be this, that if the gods saw you, if Baal saw you, then he was going to judge you. And you didn't want to be around a prophet, and you didn't want to be around anything that had to do with God, because then God was going to look and he was going to judge you and find you wanting. There's a strong sense of that in a lot of the ancient religions, that God is a merciless judge. That's the thing about the Bible, the thing about Christ, the thing about the Old Testament and the New Testament, is that it shows that God is love and that he does things out of love. But she was a believer that if God saw things, then he was going to mercilessly judge all of the evil in her life and find her wanting. And now, because of all of that, God has taken her son away from her. In her belief system, God has done this almost out of spite, right? And so Elijah said to her, "Give me your son." So she took him from her arms. Oh, that's just so sad, right? That he is literally dying in her arms. And he brought him to an upstairs room where he was staying. He laid on his own bed. Then he cried out to the Lord and said, "Lord, my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow I am staying with by killing her son?" Elijah's having a questioning moment. He's like, "God, is this? Lord, you said she was going to provide for me, and this is looking really bad on me, God." And I used to love Pastor Brashear used to pray this way, or he used to say this all the time. I love this. He would pray and he would say, "God, this is a thing from you. We know this is a thing from you, and if it doesn't happen. I'm not going to look bad, God. You're going to look bad because we believe in you and our faith is in you. And that's a brave prayer to pray because you better know that that thing is from God and not just something you want and something you're wishing for, right? But there's a way in which when you know it is from God and you're like, God, this is on you. This is your name, Lord. This is your glory. This is your work on the earth. Father, if you don't do something, people are not going to believe in you. And it's about you and not about me and not about whether somebody sees me perform a miracle or it's not my hands that heal somebody or I don't have to have the attention for doing it, but it's God doing the thing. And so he has that moment where he questions his God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow I am staying with by killing her son? Then he stretched himself over the boy 3 times. And my question is, was 3 times the magic number, or did the first 2 times fail? And he's getting more and more desperate, like, all right, Lord, I prayed once. All right, Lord, I prayed twice. So he lays over him 3 times, and he cried out to the Lord and said, Lord, my God, please let this boy's life come into him again. So the Lord listened to Elijah. What I like about that phrase, so the Lord listened to Elijah. It was the action of Elisha that opened the way for this miracle to happen. There's an act of will that Elisha had to perform in order for the work of God to be done. What you do matters. What you pray matters. And if what you pray matters, and if what you do matters, then what you don't do also matters, and what you don't pray also matters. That may mean that there are times in your life where God is waiting to do a miracle through you for someone, and your lack of prayer or your lack of action can rob that person of a miracle. What if Elijah rebels? What if Elijah's heart is hardened? What if Elijah blames God and walks away, and the widow's son dies? Do we live in a world that is bereft of miracles because the people of God do not pray and seek God and believe him to do the thing? Do we live in a world that seems less supernatural because the people of God are not acting like the supernatural sons and daughters of the Most High that they are? I wonder about that sometimes. Are there people that should be blessed that are not blessed because God's people do not pray? I'm going to leave that in your lap. All right, that's yours now. And thanks for listening. Now you're more guilty, right? But you know what that also means? That also means that you are opening yourself up to the possibility that God may use you in a way today, this very day, to perform a miracle in someone's life, right? All right. It's on God to do it, but it's on you to believe and to act in faith, right? All right. So the Lord listened to Elijah, and the boy's life came into him again, and he lived. Then Elijah took the boy, brought him down from the upstairs room into the house, and gave him to his mother. Elijah said, "Look, your son is alive." Then the woman said to Elijah, and this kind of gets me because God has been doing a whole lot for her so far. God has opened a lot of doors for this gal so far. But here she says, "Now I know you are a man of God, and that the Lord, capital, Yahweh's word from your mouth is true." So in this moment, she's become either a believer or more of a believer, or however it happened. Now she truly, truly believes. She was seeking, she was looking, she was mad at God at one point, she was mad at the man of God at one point, but when God showed himself to her, her response was acceptance, her response was faith, her response, now I believe that the word of God from your mouth is true. So 2 things, the last 3 things about this, and this is the one I really like, is that miracles are oftentimes an act of love. That we all see a miracle at some point in our life. If you are seeking after God, right? What does he say? You have to first believe that he is good and that he is a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. And if you have those 2 things, and that's it, right? Believe, right? That he is good and he's a rewarder of those that diligently seek him. That if you seek after God, if your heart presses after God, you are at some point going to see him intervene on your behalf because he loves you. as a sign of love. It's like me opening the car door for my wife. It's like me going to get food for my wife. It's like me seeing my wife struggling to carry something, and I go and I pick up part of that load for her because of God's love for you at some point in your life. And this is how I could, if you get deep into people's lives, and that's why I hate it when they really just come out and try to deny God like in a pure materialistic atheistic form, because here's what I know, that everyone who seeks after God finds him. And that in some way in his life, not only is there's a supernatural act where he comes into our heart and absolutely changes that, but we will find at some point in our life there is a circumstance or a situation that only because of the intervention and action of God does it change into a positive result in our life. And he does it sometimes for no other reason than he just loves you. He just loves you. And because he loves you, he does things for you. And it's an amazing thing to think that God is sitting on the edge of his throne, looking down, waiting for that moment where he can show his love to you in some small way in the course of your day, where all of a sudden something turns out the way it was supposed to turn out, against odds, against what should have happened, because God has stepped in and shown his love for you. And another one, and that's also, by the way, I put John 21. For each of these, I have a reference. So the provision of desperation is in 1 Kings 17, obviously, as a sign to seekers, Matthew 16, where he says, you wicked, adulterous generation, you seek a sign, but it's not going to be given to you except the sign of Jonah. It's an act of love. John 21, when Peter is being restored to Jesus, what does Jesus show him first? He shows him the miracle, the same miracle he performed for him the first time. When Peter has walked away from his faith, when he has gone back to being a fisherman, when he has seen all of his hopes and dreams die, and all he can do is just going back to doing the thing he knows to do, which is to catch fish, that Jesus shows up on the shore, and in the same sort of miracle he called him by, he restores him by. Because I've seen it in my own life, when in times where I lose faith, man, when people come against you in the ministry, when people come against you in life, when it doesn't seem like the bills are going to be met, when it seems like the world is falling apart, that God will do for you the same kind of miracle that he did when he saved you. That same sort of change in your heart that he brought about, that same sort of, hey, remember how I said I loved you? I still do. Right? And sometimes, and this is one I put this one in for my wife. I put this one in for my sister, Annette. That I know people in their lives, God bless them, have a gift of miracles. And that on some level makes me mad. And that makes me mad because of this. Because a lot of times I'm a little bit more like David. In David's life, you don't see a lot of miracles. You see amazing things that God is doing through David. He is killing giants. He is building the kingdom of God. He is, just all of the things, right? He is smiting Philistines. He is, seeing mighty victories won, right? All of these things. But he doesn't get them miraculously. He gets them by doing them, right? Like God's like, go do the thing. And when he receives correction, it's not even God speaking to David. What is it? It's God speaking through the prophets to him. And David is a man after God's own heart, and he writes music for God, and he writes some beautiful psalms and has this intimate relationship with God. But God kind of expects David to get off his tush and just go do the stuff. He doesn't do it for him a lot of times. And I know people in my life that for whatever reason, God does more miracles for them than he does for me. And I'm like, seriously, right? Like I would have to fight for that thing, Lord, and you just give it to them. That doesn't seem fair. And it is fair because God knows what he's doing, and he gives that gift to the people who he knows are going to use it according to his will. And sometimes, and this is the last one, like in Isaiah 14:27, God does miracles sometimes just because he wants to, because he's God and he can. And he doesn't need your permission. He doesn't need your affirmation. He doesn't need you to sign on the dotted line. God sometimes does it because he is God, and he is a loving God, and he just likes to do it. And sometimes he just does it, and you're just like, I don't know what to do with that. The other side of that, and this is where people struggle with, is that sometimes because they've seen the miraculous happen in their life, they've seen miracles happen to themselves and other people, that there are times when God does not perform the miracle for them that they want, and it causes for them a crisis of belief. And I want to tell you that it's wrong. Right? Because God doesn't perform the specific miracle you want at a specific time is never a reason for you to say God doesn't love you, God doesn't want you to succeed, God doesn't, ever do miracles for you, because you know that he does. But sometimes you're going to walk through it. Sometimes healing comes on the other side. Sometimes healing comes, by being in his presence for eternity. That sometimes you see the resurrection here. I love in the story of Lazarus when Jesus walks up there and Mary says, or Martha or Mary, I forget which one says, I think it says, I think it was Mary. Sorry, I'm going through the story in my head now. I think it was Mary. And says to him, Jesus, if you'd only listened, if you'd only got here, my brother wouldn't be dead. And Jesus says, your brother will live. And she says, I get it, Jesus, in the resurrection and in eternity, we're all going to be resurrected and live. And Jesus looks her in the eye and says, I am the resurrection and the life, and he that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And I can't imagine, but those words didn't shake her to the core. I mean, even now, thousands of years later, and just hearing them on paper, and not even out loud, but knowing the voice of Christ looked her in the eye and said, I am the resurrection and the life, and he that believes in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. But here's the other side of that story. Lazarus will eventually die. He's not out there walking the earth today. Jesus raised him once, but at some point he was going to taste death. At some point, Mary, Martha, all of the disciples, all of the people that walked with him, they all came to that place and they tasted death. That there is an ultimate resurrection that's on the other side. And that is ultimately what will happen. That is the supernatural order of things that God has put into place, much like giving and you'll be given unto you, much like, when you tithe, he opens the storehouse and all those sorts of promises that if you give, it's given back, right? And in the same way, when you believe on him, you are going to have life eternal. That no matter what happens to this body, that the soul, the who you are will live on in the presence of God, that he has a new heaven and a new earth and a new creation, and all of that will absolutely happen. But sometimes, death is what should happen, and instead, he brings life. Sometimes, in our lives, in our walk, in our existence, in our day-to-day, we should die. Or death should come. Or that relationship should fail. Or that bill shouldn't be met. Or the car should break down. Man, listen, hey, I've never met a preacher who didn't have to pray over a crappy vehicle sometime to get that thing moving. I remember one time, man, you talk about miracles. I remember one time I had a car that was burning oil through the head gasket. The life of this engine was in a bad place. This was my own miracle of oil, because here's the thing, is that thing was burning a quart of gas tank, right? So when you're burning a quart of oil in the gas tank, white smoke's coming out of the back. It's the wrong color smoke to be coming out of the back of the car. That thing is going to blow up the engine. I came to this place where I was like, Lord, I cannot afford another car. I don't know what to do here. I don't have the means or the resources. God, you've got to help me with this. And the car stopped smoking. And this is the miraculous thing, the engine stopped burning oil. So when I would go to check the oil to see how much I would need to put in, it was fine. And it was fine. And every time I'm like, and it was fine. And all of a sudden, my car is in a good place and it's working. And I'm like, this is amazing, Lord. I don't even know what to say about this. And that went on for about 2 to 3 months, where all of a sudden the thing was working like it was supposed to work, until somebody in a Mustang came up off an exit, hit a patch of ice, and pinned my car. And I watched him do it. I'm like watching him, like, that guy is not driving well. And here he comes, and boom, pins me into the guardrail, smashes my car up, smashes his car up. And we're sitting there along the side of the road waiting for the police to come to check out the accident. And I noticed something as I'm walking by my car, and it's a little bit of white smoke. And I go and I look underneath my car, and where the tailpipe is before the muffler rusted out, and the white smoke was coming out of the bottom of the car instead of the back of the car. And so what does that mean? That means me not seeing the white smoke was because it was coming out somewhere else. Now, the oil thing, I still can't explain why it was that all of a sudden the engine stopped burning oil, because it did this, like I said, for 3 months, right? Stops burning oil, and the engine gets me through. And the thing about it is the guy's accident was completely his fault, and I end up getting a brand new car out of it that I got through the insurance money. God had made a way to provide for me. That way was going to take me up against a guardrail, but God bless it, we still got there. And I always look at that because there's just so many different aspects of that. Okay, Lord, why did you do it this way? And why did you do it this way? And why did you do it this way? And all I can pull out of any of that is that he loves me, and that sometimes that's how he shows it. And that he is a good God, and it's an amazing thing to be in his presence and in his will. So with that today, I hope you guys are blessed. I hope you guys see miracles. I hope the Lord uses you to perform a miracle in someone else's life. I hope that someone today has a situation in their life that is only in their life because God has allowed it, because God has set a minister to cross their path who is going to bring a divine intervention, and I hope that person is you. So with that, good to have you here this morning. We are at 8 o'clock. Love you guys. Be real, be loved, and be one.